Hey all, in this video what I wanted to talk about was the differences between Final Fantasy XIV's Alliance raids and World of Warcraft's Lookin' for Raid. This is something I've seen pop up in comments and during some of my favorite Final Fantasy XIV streams, and what they are really getting at, what they really want to know is, which one is more difficult? Here is the thing about comparing the difficulties. Alliance raids in Final Fantasy XIV are nothing like World of Warcraft's Lookin' for Raid, and because of that, they are kind of hard to compare. If you want to know about the difficulties between the two, that isn't nearly as straightforward as it may appear. The funny thing is, despite playing World of Warcraft for many, and I mean many more years than Final Fantasy XIV, I've done Alliance raids so many more times than I've ever touched Lookin' for Raid. There's a real good reason why I barely touched Lookin' for Raid, but I will get more into that later on in the video. Now, before even trying to compare the difficulties, I think it would be a good idea to consider what Lookin' for Raid and Alliance raids actually are. The first thing we have to consider is this. World of Warcraft's Lookin' for Raid is a difficulty level for their raids. So, if you want to think of that in terms of Final Fantasy XIV, Lookin' for Raid would be a difficulty level below normal mode. So, just imagine a normal mode boss scaled down to have less HP, do less damage, and maybe even have some mechanics taken out altogether, and or simplified. And that would be what Lookin' for Raid is. Now, this is very different than what Final Fantasy XIV's Alliance raids have to offer. They are completely new raids, created specifically to cater to a 24-man group. So this is how it works. You are randomly assigned into one of 3 8-man groups, and each of those groups are randomly assigned a letter, A, B, or C. The raids actually have some encounters that take advantage of this, where the groups are split up based on their letter, and then have to do certain mechanics and kill certain enemies with their assigned group. The big takeaway here is that Alliance raids are not just taking a raid encounter and tuning it down to an easier level. They are new encounters with new mechanics. In World of Warcraft, Lookin' for Raid is a tool used mostly by players who are new to raiding, or don't want to, or can't engage with the harder content, for whatever reason. So the average experience of the raiders in LFR tends to be on the lower side. This is because there really isn't much of a reason for seasoned raiders to step into Lookin' for Raid. It's the exact same raid that they have been running anyways, just tuned to be much easier. Where is the incentive? What would compel these more experienced raiders to want to jump into Lookin' for Raid? If it's a question of maybe getting gear, well, the item level of LFR is low. That isn't a good incentive. Essentially, if you are an experienced player, there are so many better avenues to get gear. And what's more, you have a better chance of getting gear doing that other content. Running Mythic Plus would be a very good example of this. Just a quick side note, Mythic Plus, in case you don't know what that is, it is a difficulty mode for dungeons that scales up forever. But if you can clear them up to a certain level, let's say around 14, you can get some really nice gear. And for experienced raiders, clearing Mythic Plus up to 14 really isn't too much of an ask, and that gear will far outclass what you can get in LFR. And the other thing to consider is, you are more likely to get gear running Mythic Plus than you are running LFR. Also, by the time Lookin' for Raid is opened, because it's not available the first week that a new tier drops, experienced raiders will have cleared the normal and most of, if not all of the heroic modes of the raid. There really isn't much of a point for these players to go into LFR. Now, in Final Fantasy XIV, Alliance raids aren't like that at all. That's because they are completely different raids, with new encounters and environments. Moreover, they also introduce brand new storylines and characters that go with the raids. It's a very different dynamic than what LFR has to offer. Because of that, all sorts of players want to go into the Alliance raids, and yes, that includes the more seasoned raiders. I mean, who doesn't want to play through a brand new raid with fun new encounters to fight and learn. The fact that it's a completely different experience makes everyone want to do these raids. As an anecdotal example, I knew some players that raided these Stormblood Alliance raids all the time, because they loved the boss fights and the environments. And yes, these were experienced savage/ultimate raiders. What can I say? A fun encounter is a fun encounter, and if that encounter is in the Alliance raids, well then, that's where you go. Not only that, the gear sets in Alliance raids are completely different art assets than what you can get in the other raids. Yet again, another thing that draws all sorts of players into doing the Alliance raids. You may get higher item level gear from doing these savage encounters, but if you want that cool looking set from the Alliance raid, well then you have to go into the Alliance raid. All of that is to say that Alliance raids are run by a variety of players, with all types of raiding experience, and that's because they are designed in such a way that makes all these different types of players want to run them. LFR is mostly run by players with little to no raiding experience. That is because seasoned raiders have no real reason to go into LFR, so they don't. So, when it comes to difficulty, I am going to talk about this from the perspective of running these in a complete pug. While I never had the pleasure of doing an Alliance raid, where everyone was an experienced raider from my FC, I have done exactly that in LFR before, and let me tell you that when you have a bunch of experienced raiders running LFR, it is a complete joke, and I'd imagine Alliance raids would be similar in that regard. So, let me first go on about my experiences with LFR. I joined Battle for Azeroth right at the end, because I wanted to play Shadowlands. Because of this, I missed all the raids and decided to run LFR, just to see them. In a complete pug, I queued by myself. I didn't die to a single mechanic in all those fights. When I did die, it was because the tanks died and it was going to be a raid wipe anyways. Part of that is because mechanics don't hit very hard in LFR, and part of it is because I have a lot of experience raiding, so I can usually recognize mechanics and figure out what's going on. Now, here's my experience with Alliance raids. I've mentioned this before, but I've been much more active with Alliance raids than I ever was with LFR, because they are different experiences. Now, I've done a few of the Alliance raids when they were new and no one knew what they were doing, and I've done a lot of them when they've been out for a long time and most of the players knew the fights very well. Big difference here is, I died more than I care to admit my first few times running certain Alliance raids, mostly in Stormblood and beyond, and this includes when I was at a vastly higher item level than when the raids first came out. So, the funny thing is, I've experienced far more wipes in Looking for Raid, not because I was failing at anything in particular, but because the group was not performing very well. If the majority of the group dies, your performance matters very little in the end. Alliance raids, I personally died more, but because the groups tended to be so much more adept at the fights, we still cleared them anyways, despite my sucking. So, which is harder? I think Alliance raids are harder. The fact that I died so much more often in Alliance raids due to my own personal failings, that seems to suggest that they provide more of a challenge, right? Anyways, that was my opinion from my own experiences, but what do you all think? Have you had any trouble with the Alliance raids? How do you think they compare to LFR? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day. If you liked the video, please consider giving a thumbs up and subscribing for more. Thanks again and take care.